All righty. And Kathy is a farmer here in Worcester, Ohio, and her farm, Misty Oaks Farm, has been very involved with parasite resistance research, and that has encompassed several farms and researchers, and very excited to have her today to talk to us a little bit about how that project started and grew, and all the exciting things that came with it. So Kathy, I am going to turn it right over to you.
Okay,
and yeah, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, and I can kind of monitor that.
Right. So, okay, so I click this and did that work, Cassie?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, super. Okay, so I'm going to just admit right up front that this is Cassie's title, and I'm not exactly sure what it means, but she assures me it's good, so I believe her. Sorry, Cassie. So I'm just going to talk really quickly, and hopefully not too quickly. I do have a tendency to talk fast, so if I get going fast because I have a short time here to cover a lot of stuff, somebody can flag me somehow. I'm first going to tell you just a little bit about us and what the problem is. I'm guessing that most of you are not sheep producers, so just give you a little bit of background so you understand what we were doing, tell you what we have done as far as grants and research, some of the lessons we learned and where we are today. So as Cassie said, my husband Jeff and I have Misty Oaks Farm here in Worcester. We raise Katahdin hair sheep. We bought our first Katahdins in 2001. Our primary market is breeding stock, seed stock. Katahdins are a great breed, we think. They're hardy, easy care, no shearing. You can see here they shed naturally, which is comical at times and weird, but they end up looking like this, and it's nice. They were also, we were told, very parasite resistant. And that was important. I didn't know why, but when we got into sheep, we were told that parasites were the biggest problem with sheep. They can kill the sheep. You have to deworm them every 30 days. And you use a different dewormer each time, or you used one dewormer until it quit working. And how you knew that, I was never sure. And why you did all this, I wasn't sure. And I worked in the organic program and didn't think this was a good idea at all. So that's where we started. A lot of people don't think that they have a problem with parasites. They associate parasites only with lamb deaths. That's actually not the biggest cost of parasites. It's more a loss of production. You have lower milk in the ewes, lower fertility rates, much slower lamb growth. So, and then lamb deaths, of course, are still an issue. A lot of times, even people don't realize they have resistance to dewormers, because if you kill even a portion of the when you say resistant to dewormers, you need to understand too that that doesn't mean that the dewormer doesn't work at all. It's just that it's not 100% effective. It may only be 80%. So sometimes just killing some of the worms relieves enough of the disease symptoms that the sheep are fine. So a lot of people don't realize until they're over the edge, where they're at. The biggest concern in east of the Mississippi is this Homunculus contortus, or the barber pole worm. It's the big problem is that it's extremely prolific, with adult females laying 5,000 to 10,000 eggs a day. It's a blood-sucking parasite. It causes anemia. So why won't this go? There it goes. This is what the kind of the life cycle. So the eggs are passed in the manure. The larvae mature over a period of 3 to 5 days. And the infective stage, the L3 stage, are ingested by the ewes, or all the animals, from the grass. And then there's another 19 to 21 day prepatent cycle, you know, where the worms are growing inside the sheep and sucking blood. They don't actually suck, by the way. People used to say that, but they now know that they have a little lance on the end of their nose and they slice the lining of the abomasum, and that causes pools of blood that they can kind of lap up. So even if they're not attached, they're still the lining of the abomasum is still seeping blood. So hence again the anemia. This is what it looks like on the pasture. You have previous year's larvae. The eggs don't overwinter, but the L3s do, the L3 larvae. The ewes go through this periparturient rise. Their immune response is lessened while they're lactating. So if you're lambing here in April, May, the egg counts will go up. Then the lambs come along, and being naive, their systems, you see, they really magnify the problem exponentially. And then that gets carried over to the following year, okay? Historically, what we've done is what I mentioned earlier. You deworm your lambs every so many days, and the problem with this is you need to have an effective dewormer, and we don't have that anymore. Drug resistance, it develops as a trait, a genetic trait in the parasite, in the worm. Once it's present, it's probably permanent. And the biggest thing here is that when you treat all of your animals and move them to a safer, clean pasture, you're pretty much guaranteeing resistant parasites. And it's funny that, not funny, that when we got into sheep 20 years ago, that was the newest and greatest thing. And Dr. Shula had just put out a publication the year before we met with him and started on this project, where that was one of the recommendations. Treat all of your animals in the barn and then move them to a clean pasture, and you're good for the summer, or at least for a good portion of it. And when we started working on this and he realized what he was suggesting, it was a real wake-up call. Here's just a little graphic that shows, if you treat or get rid of all of these susceptible worms, all you're left with is the resistant ones. That's what's being deposited on your pasture. So that's seeding your pastures with a new generation of resistant parasites. So that's some background. The whole thing for me, started in Maine at this Katahdin hair sheep gathering, in this one talk called Monitoring Internal Parasite Infections and How to Build a Flock Resistant to Internal Parasites. I think for the first time, I kind of got what the parasite issue was, and this made so much sense to me. I was so excited. I came back to work and told Deb Steiner, my boss at the time, oh my gosh, this is such exciting stuff. And she said, why don't you do that as you could try that out as a SARE grant. I will say that with this, at the time, this is 20 years ago, remember, it seems really, really obvious now that selection is, this is so commonplace. But at the time, this was novel. And we were only the third group in the United States to be trained on this FAMACHA, which I'll talk about in just a second. So this is really new stuff. So Deb says, why don't you try it out? You can get a Warner grant and do it. And she said, go call Dr. Shula. And she says, who would you talk to? And I said, well, Dr. Shula, he's incredible. She says, well, give him a call. Oh, no, I can't do that. I'm too shy. No, I can't possibly call him. So she said, give me the phone. And she called and set it up. And if it wasn't for Deb Steiner, I'm telling you, it would not have probably gone too much farther. But she got Dr. Shula and then we pulled in Dr. Parker for the genetic part of it. And so the whole concept now is behind the selective treatment is that every animal in the flock doesn't have the same number of parasites, okay? Some of them, just like you all have different levels of immunity to a common cold or to COVID, remember? So, and the animals are the same way with the parasites. So this kind of shows it in a graph form. And the idea is that if we can identify these few animals that have the highest fecal egg counts, we can lower our pasture contamination dramatically. And then we keep all of these, we don't treat these, and we have what's called refugia. So we have susceptible parasites still on your pasture. And that's important because you're never going to get rid of all of them. So you want to have parasites that can work with you, if you think about it in a weird way, that can be at least killed. You know, if you've got an animal that's in crisis, you need to be able to control those parasites. You've got to be able to kill them. And if all they have is resistant worms in them, you can't do that, okay? So here's another way of looking at it. Here's just a couple or 5 little fairly recently weaned ram lambs on our pastures. And you can see these fecal egg counts go from 150 to 22,000. So again, if we can identify these high shedding animals, well, what a way to control the parasites, right? This is FAMACHA. That's, in case for people who don't have sheep, that's an eye, a sheep's eye. What you're looking at is the mucosa here. And you're trying to determine the level of anemia. This is a system that was developed in South Africa, and FAMACHA is some kind of a play on his name. And I should know it, but I don't. But you're looking at this chart and comparing the levels of anemia, and you can kind of estimate worm burden according to that. We also did fecal egg counts, where we're actually collecting manure from the animals, mixing it up and reading these slides and looking for these guys here, these eggs. So this is the Warner grant we were talking about. The goal with this was simply to see if it could be done. And the collaborators on that were Dr. Shulaw and Deb at that point. So this is my first lesson in research. We were trying to find out, remember, we're looking at, do we have resistance to the dewormers? We were doing fecal egg counts every week because Dr. Shulaw knew we were going to kill our sheep. He was just very, very uncomfortable with this whole project that first year. And it just so happened, I mean, this was truly coincidence, that half of the ewes needed to be dewormed based on our, level of anemia or whatever body condition score, the criteria we had set. And I sent him an email right away going, hey, look at this, we did it, it was a reduction. And he came back and he said, it was a 68% reduction. We're looking for 95 or better. And did you notice, by the way, that the untreated ewes came down 84%? Oh. So what we found is that we do have resistance to the dewormer, and I learned how very important a control group is. We would never have known that without it. So what we were actually seeing is this periprurient rise that I mentioned earlier, where they're low here at lambing, they go up as their immune system is compromised. Their resources are actually being channeled towards lactation. And as the milk production starts to slack off here at about 6 weeks, their immune system picks back up and their fecal egg count comes down very naturally. Most of the time. Sometimes they get stuck up here and they keep going up and they need to be dewormed. But the natural cycle is to come back down naturally. That led us to our first SARE grant. We were essentially going to be doing the same things, just monitoring the sheep and developing a flock management plan, and then to collect preliminary research. What we found, we had actually seen this the first year, but it was kind of reiterated or, strengthened the second year, that there are actually, we saw differences in the sires of our lambs. So the lambs that were sired by this particular ram, this ram C, notice that all of his lambs, how high they got, their fecal egg counts, and they all had to be dewormed. Whereas this lamb here, ram A, none of his lambs had to be dewormed ever. And look at how slow they stayed. So that was pretty exciting stuff to me. Of course, I talked about it at the Katahdin meetings, and oh my gosh, and everyone was so excited. And we ended up with 10 more producers that said they wanted to be, let's see if we can do this on a bigger scale. Is this only happening on my farm, or can we apply this across other farms? The other thing is, this is great if we can identify sires that have low offspring with low fecal egg counts. That implies that it's heritable, right? Is that true? I learned about controls, remember, and is what we're seeing really a true thing? So, and if it is, I'm going to need new genetics. How do I find another ram that's low? So those were kind of some of the things driving this second grant. There were 10 participants from 3 different states, and we added, or Dr. Notter joined our group. He is a quantitative geneticist at Virginia Tech, and very, very involved in the sheep industry, and it was a huge help to us. All of our cooperators or collaborators were. We were very, very, very fortunate. So with this, one of the things that we learned pretty quick was that we needed to have an adequate number of animals. The differences in fecal egg counts, well, you saw earlier, 2,000 or 200 to 10,000 makes it really necessary. You've got to have enough animals. If you were only looking at 5 animals, whoops, wrong thing. If you're only looking at these few animals, you could get a really, really different idea of what's going on here. You have to have at least 10, and 15 is really the best to be able to see the true, get a real picture. So this is something else that we learned fairly quickly. Resistant sheep have naturally low levels of parasites. Resilient sheep, on the other hand, can tolerate high numbers without showing anemia. So their FAMACHA scores were showing up as fine, but their fecal egg counts were very, very different. And those animals are a little tricky because they could be shedding huge numbers of eggs on your pastures and contaminating them while still, looking, at least they're not showing signs of disease, at least initially. Sometimes they go on to do that. Also, really important, this goes back to that control thing. Without adequate exposure to parasites, most sheep are going to have low fecal egg counts and high, and good FAMACHA scores, right? So you've got to have a challenge. And what we found was that at least 500 eggs per gram, and preferably higher, is what's needed. It's kind of ironic is that when we first started, a fecal egg count of 500 eggs per gram would have had the vet running to, oh my God, you've got to deworm that animal. That's terrible. That's not high. You saw some of those numbers, 22,000. Yeah, 500 is nothing. So yeah, the things have changed a lot in 20 years. Here's some of the things that influence fecal egg counts: the time of year, the age of the animal, nutrition, level of pasture contamination, stress. And here's an example of that. This is some actual data from that study. The fecal egg counts in May, you can see the average was only 115, but when you get out here to July, it's up to 11,000. And remember that graph of or that diagram of the pasture contamination, how those ewes periprurient rise and the lambs magnify that through the summer. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So it was kind of exciting in one way, frustrating in another, that when we were looking at these factors influencing fecal egg counts, it was frustrating because depending on the farm you were on, we all had different management strategies. We were all grass-based, but we all had different, climates, different management, different, grasses. And it was hard sometimes teasing out what was going on and sometimes we weren't able to get a challenge, or we weren't able to tell what was happening. But then we realized that what made it difficult to get a challenge could also be used as tools for managing, especially like in an organic system, or, in a system where you were trying to use fewer chemicals, right? If you know that older and heavier lambs, are less susceptible, then that might be a way to do it. If you know that nutrition is a way, that helps lower your fecal egg counts, well, then maybe that's something you can use to, to manage without having to go through all the stuff that we did. So anyway, so those were just some things that we learned. Dr. Parker then.
Kathy, can I ask
Yeah.
a quick question? Do you
Sure.
think you would have found that out if you hadn't had multiple farms involved? Like, was that definitely a benefit of getting multiple farms
Oh,
involved with
absolutely.
this? Okay.
Absolutely, Cassie. Because on my farm, I'm only looking at one management style. With 10 of us, every one of us had something different. One of us fed corn differently. They fed corn. This one had fescue grass. This one had, higher stocking density. This one moved his sheep every week and never came back for a year. Everything was so different. It was incredibly frustrating for me managing this to try to figure out what was going on. But it did point out and allow us to see that, and then be able to turn that around and say, wait, we could use these as tools to manage. So anyway, did that answer? Okay. So Dr. Parker then challenged us and he said, if we could control that periprurient rise, if we could, these are some of our ewes, one of those first few years. And you can see that the fecal egg counts actually ranged from 150 to 17,000. So think what this ewe is contributing. And when we say eggs per gram, a gram of fecal material is not even as big as a mini jelly bean, about that big. That's a lot. They put out a lot of those in a day. So that's a really heavy pasture contamination. Okay. So Dr. Parker said, if we could identify those, is there a way that we can breed for ewes that have lower fecal egg counts? Well, again, it's obvious today, but back then it was like, wow, that's kind of wild thinking. Let's try it. So that, of course, led us to yet another FAIR grant. And the goal here, of course, was to determine if the ewes with low fecal egg counts as lambs, did that carry over to adulthood? And we had the same Dr. Parker, Dr. Shula, and Dr. Notter helping us. This one was a lot more difficult. It was easier to manage because there were fewer of us, but the results were more mixed. We also, at this point, were lucky enough to have some of the researchers here at Ohio State in the Animal Sciences Department, Dr. Steve Lurch and several of his technicians and crew were able to do a regression analysis and worked with us and with Dr. Notter to get all of that. The results were kind of mixed. We found that the issues are quite complex, but we did find a positive correlation between the fecal egg count as a lamb and the fecal egg count during the periprurient rise, and that Dr. Notter was able to, with all of the analysis that he did and Steve and all did, find that it is a heritable trait. It's highly correlated to the fecal egg counts as a lamb, but seems to be a separate trait. So, and it is heritable. So the one thing I do want to point out, we keep talking about parasite resistance, and we never, or Dr. Parker especially, because he's also a geneticist, was always making very sure that we didn't get stuck on doing single trait selection. One of the tools that we came up with and that I still use to this day is doing this little chart that kind of plots the pounds of lamb weaned by a ewe against her fecal egg count. Okay, so what I'm looking for are these lamb or ewes that have a low fecal egg count during the periprurient rise, but that are producing a lot of lamb for me. These are my top producers. I want to get rid of these up here that have high fecal egg counts and don't produce much lamb. There's not a whole lot to be gained there. So anyway, so that's and this particular ewe is one of those that fits right in here. That's her set of triplets from this year. So we are, I think, making some progress. So now some of my wool friends were saying, wow, that's really, really cool, but does it work for wool sheep also? Well, here's another SARE grant. So we did another one. And I worked with John Anderson, who's a polypay breeder here in Worcester, and Bruce Rickard, who's was an organic producer, and over in Knox County. Bruce had a flock of commercial wool sheep, and John has a flock of registered polypays. And we were able to find, after a great deal of work, that genetic selection for parasite resistance is possible in a wool breed, and integration of resistant genes into a commercial flock also worked well. Again, the same thing keeps coming up. We had to have an adequate number of lambs per group, and a parasite challenge is essential. And this is when I said no more grants, because let me tell you, well, we'll come back to that at the end. So in addition to all of the work that we were doing on our farm and our own stuff, we were also very, very fortunate to work with Dr. Joan Burke. I met her in 2008 at the National SARE Convention, and she's a researcher with USDA ARS in Arkansas with a real strong passion for small ruminants and parasites. And I got to participate as a farmer producer in all of her grants here. So even when we've quit doing grants or doing the research on our farm, I was still contributing to all of these different projects. So I didn't actually think about this until Cassie asked me to do this history, but I've been on a grant of one sort or another for 20 years, which is kind of crazy, but we've gotten so much good stuff out of it. Anyway, that's her. And where are we going in the future? This is Dr. Scott Bowdridge. He's West Virginia University, and he's an immunologist and looking at the immune response and how, how that works. And he's correlating that to overall disease immunity. And that's exciting. So we're contributing blood now to his work, a couple of his projects as well. And Dr. Ron Lewis at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, he's a quantitative geneticist who's working on genomic enhanced estimated breeding values. And I'm on his grant now. That's another 2 years. That's a lot of work. It's just a lot of data that has to be collected and then compiled and sent to him, and I'm behind. So as soon as we get this finished, I will have to get caught up on that. So there's just so much going on. It's just come such a long way, and it's so exciting. And I really appreciate Cassie giving me this opportunity to really look back and see how far it's come. I wanted to mention quickly the value of grant support. As you've seen, I've had quite a few of them, but a lot of people that I've talked to say, oh, I want to get a grant because I could use the money for, XYZ. In my opinion, the financial support is the least important. You're never going to get enough money. Trust me, you will never get enough money from a grant to pay for all of your time and hassle and all of that. You might get enough to buy a scale or do a few things, but it will not compensate you for the amount of work involved. And at least it hasn't for me. But what it does do, it gives you accountability. I would not have collected all the data that I have collected and had this valuable resource if I hadn't been accountable to somebody. I've promised to do something, I'm going to do it. It gives you credibility. I can't walk into an OFA meeting or, talk to any of you and say, oh, hey, guess what? I collected some fecals on my lambs and I know all this. Well, the grants actually give you some credibility. It also, and this is really important to me, gives you a form of relationship with your collaborators. There is no way, there's no way I would have called Dr. Strudel in the first place if it wasn't for Deb. But even with that, I would never have felt comfortable picking up the phone and calling him or Dr. Parker or Dr. Nodder and saying, hey, I have a question. As a collaborator, we were in it together and it was a team and it really worked. And I just think it's so important. It just makes it like a formal kind of a thing. So that to me is the value of a grant, for at least from a farmer. I think maybe an academic grant, maybe you get more money, but farmer grants. Anyway, I just think that they're very, very valuable. So just kind of to summarize a little bit, I really, really feel that collaboration is essential. I think researchers and farmers need to work together for the best results. I think that record keeping is essential. You've got to keep consistent and accurate records, and they need to be appropriate records. And that's where, again, working with a collaborator is so important to help identify what you need to capture. And then you need to keep it going. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have thought, oh man, I'm not going to do those fecals this year on the ewes. I can get by. And then I think, no, I've got all these years. I've got to keep it going. I just got to, then I'll have a big hole. You've got to have a passion for what you're doing. If you're not really interested, you're not really going to make any, it's not going to be doable. Good time management. You've got to have a balance. You've got to learn to prioritize. I'm still learning that, and I'm still learning about balance. I haven't conquered either one yet, but I really do think that they're important. And maybe the most important thing is you've got to keep an open mind. You've got to be willing to learn, and you've got to be willing to change your mind or change your mindset when you find out something didn't go like you planned. So, is that what you wanted, Cassie?
That was great.
Did I do it in 20 minutes?
Well, you're
Not
a little
quite.
over, but there's still plenty of time for questions. So,
Okay.
yeah. If anyone has a good question, or even one they think is maybe not so good, we don't care. The bar is low here. Go ahead and ask that question. I'm going to start out with a question. Kathy, you mentioned you were really nervous about reaching out to a researcher when you started this out. One of the things I think we want to do with this group is kind of lower that fear, lower those barriers. So you can answer this, and anyone else on the call could answer this too, but like what kinds of things, if Deb Steiner is not available, what might help lower that barrier?
For me, probably knowing who to contact. So I had been to enough sheep meetings. Dr. Shula had presented at many of them, and I had actually talked with him in person once. This was very big for me at the time. He was very, very important, and I was brand new and very, very intimidated. But knowing who the people are, who the players are, where to go for information is probably the biggest. Availabilities for me, I could not have probably picked up the phone and called him directly. Seeing him at a meeting, I was able to approach, and talk with him that way. So that was big for me, to talk in person. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts.
If I may, I think that's an excellent example of a role that offer can play, from the academic side, just like I did for Kathy. I mean, Kathy and I were very close co-workers, and I saw, the seeds of this great idea, and I viewed my job as the connector, as the director of offer. I connected researchers together, and then, and farmers and researchers, and it generated a lot of grants. And so whether you're at Central State or Ohio State or wherever, as a university person, I think that really needs to be top of mind and top of the mission of the formal academic programs, such as they may be.
I agree.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I have many if no one else does. Jenna, I'm going to pick on you a little bit because I know this is a topic of interest to you. Any questions? Can I urge you out there?
Yeah, I was actually typing a question in the chat. But I'll just go ahead and ask it verbally. So I'm just curious how you start this process, right? So we have a small farm with a small flock of Icelandic sheep, and we're very interested in developing parasite resistance for them. And for us, the angle that we've looked at it so far is thinking about things like, can we use herbal dewormers to treat parasites, at least in part, so that we're not developing that resistance to the commercial dewormers? Or can we change our grazing practices? Can we incorporate tree forage, things like that? So we're looking at a lot of things. Certainly, the idea of breeding parasite resistance is really interesting, and this was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for doing this. But so we're in that stage of like, we know we want to explore this. We would love to contribute to a project with other partners. Right now, our flock is 5 sheep, so it's definitely not enough to do much with, especially on our own, but we would really like to be part of something. And when I've reviewed the literature on whether different herbal supplements are effective, there's very little out there that's coming from the academic sector that is relevant, because it's all, like dosed oils in a lab setting. And what we're more interested in is the practical application of, if we incorporate wormwood into the fields that we're grazing our sheep on, is that a way for them to select forage that's going to help them control their parasite load? I really appreciated your point about how many factors go into figuring out what is actually going on, because when you're not working in a lab environment, I mean, there are so many challenges to even figuring out what you're looking at and knowing if what you're seeing is reflective of what you think it is.
Right.
So that's just sort of like where we are in the process. And I would love to, like I said, contribute to a larger project, but I'm just not sure how to make those connections or get started, or figure out exactly what the best, of these many options that we're looking at, like, what are the plants we should be concentrating on? What research out there supports any value, or is that just not a good direction to go? Should we just be looking at the genetics and thinking about breeding for parasite resistance? So I'm just curious if there's like, do you have any tips about building those connections, or the kinds of research we should be doing to start something like what you've done?
Okay, so yeah, I've had several thoughts while you were talking, Jenna. And I don't know if this is the best place to get into a lot of it. You're welcome to give me a call anytime, and we can really get down and spend some time getting into this. I'm very happy to do that. Dr. Joan Burke has done a fair bit of research on natural dewormers without much success. Most copper oxide wire particles seem to be effective. Most of the herbal type things are not, that she has found so far. But again, if you want, I want to answer you on one level about where do you go from here. And again, if you want to contact me afterwards, I'm very, very happy to, to go over what we have done, what we have found, and help you set something up, and do some thinking about who I could put you in contact with. I guess I would have to explore more from you about what you really want to do. If you're wanting to do like a SARE grant kind of a thing, I'm happy to help you explore that. But I guess I would need to know more about how far you want to go with this before I give you specific recommendations on people.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I guess, yeah, we're definitely like figuring out where we're going. But I mean, this is really relevant. I know it's not just our farm, because we were supposed to purchase sheep from 2 different people within the past month. And one of them messaged me the night before we were supposed to pick up and said, one of the ewes you were going to buy just died. And the other one messaged me the night before and said, the ram you're about to buy has a really low FOMACHA score and we want to keep him and see how he does. And so we had, we were ready to take, it was 4 additional sheep and we didn't get any of them. And these are, and so these people are, they're trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to figure out how, and it turned out both farms, it was about barber pole parasite load specifically. So,
another
talking to that, like our flock has done okay this season, but I'm talking to them. I know that they're trying different herbal treatments for their flocks. I would love to work with them or point them towards resources or like potentially, get involved with a grant myself. But there's a lot of misinformation out there and there's a lot of confusion and a lot of us are, I think, just struggling to figure out if we need to do the research ourselves. And if so, what kind of an investment of time and effort that is, or if there is research out there that we can refer to so that we don't have to do that ourselves. And I would be open to any of these options at this point, but I know that there's a need that's not being met and animals that are potentially dying that don't need to.
Right. Two quick resources that I can point you to. Dr. Brady Campbell is the new, I don't know if he's still new, it's a year or two. He's the sheep specialist for Ohio now. He's based here in Worcester. He's an excellent resource. And I know you don't have Katahdins, but you could look at the Eastern Alliance Katahdins.com website. It's one that we have, it's a group that we have started, me and, half a dozen other Katahdin producers, and now it's grown to, I don't know, we have over 100 members. And it's Eastern Alliance, but we have members in Washington State and Missouri and, whatever. It's east of something, we figure. But the blog section, we've got some really, I think, some really good information, not just on parasites, but on things like mastitis and scours. And we have a vet that's one of our members, and several of us have done some blogs. So there's some really good information on there that I think applies not just to Katahdins that you could find useful. And again, it's Eastern Alliance Katahdins.com. So check that out. And then have you looked at, okay, are you familiar, wait, it's on here, with these resources, Jenna? The small ruminant, Maryland small ruminant page, or especially, it's not the Southern Consortium anymore. That's an old slide. But I think the website's still accurate.
Are you going to share your slides after the presentation so we can go to the links and?
Sure, I can, I guess. Cassie, that's a Cassie question. I don't know.
Yeah, I could make that happen if you're willing to share them, Kathy.
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, I usually post the recordings on in the offer website, so I can post that along with it.
Okay. And Jenna, at any time, I mean, and not just you, but anybody that has questions, you're always welcome to contact me. I'm very, very much passionate about sharing information as well as doing the research stuff. So
I think too, something earlier you said, Kathy, is like going to these meetings and, field days and events. It's a great way to meet other people. And
it really is.
Well, I see either Casey or Denise had a question.
Hi, this is Denise Natoli Brooks with Central State University. Kathy, fabulous to hear your presentation. I've heard your name for quite a while and not had a chance to hear you speak before, so this was great.
Thank you.
You clearly are a person with an excellent sense of wonder and ask tons of questions, but I also heard the honest tiredness that comes with grant work and collecting data. So as this network is putting together these working groups of people with common interests, like Jenna, and asking all these questions, if you were to just off the cuff give us a couple questions that you're like, these are great questions to answer. That might kick off a small ruminant working group that would look for grants, what would you put out there as ideas for us?
A small ruminant working group to look for grants. What questions need to be answered? Is that what you're
Yes, please.
asking?
Yes.
So what I'm hearing in the Katahdin world right now, of course, parasites, and I think, well, I mentioned that, you know, that's getting to some pretty high level stuff anymore in the Katahdins. Production is still, and prolificacy are two big things. One of the tools that we have are estimated breeding values through the National Sheep Improvement Program. I don't know if any of your producers would have that as a tool. That's very handy. And there are a lot of questions, you know, that can help with, you know, it can be a monitoring kind of a tool, you know, to monitor growth and stuff like that. Different forages. I mean, Jenna had mentioned, you know, different forages, nutrition. I have a friend here with a very small farm. She's only got 5 acres and, you know, and a dozen sheep, but she's experimenting with grazing things like sunflowers and pearl millet and different things like that. Those are some, you know, and you would be wanting to look at, you know, does it have an effect on parasites? You know, which of course it should, because they're not grazing on the ground and because it's a different nutritional, you know, it's adding different nutrients. And so if you wanted to get involved in, you know, doing fecal egg count kind of work, you can also do, you know, you want to measure things like rate of gain and, you know, different strategies for that, different weaning strategies. There's been a lot of work done. I would, again, refer you back to Brady Campbell, who's the small ruminant specialist for the, you know, with Ohio State. He's a young guy, his plate's pretty full right now, but he's a great guy to work with. I think I would probably, parasites are big, but there's been so much research done that I'm not sure as far as grants where you're going to go with that. I know there's a guy in our group with Southern SARE that's doing a research project on establishing native warm season grasses. He's either in North or South Carolina, but something like that. There's a local group here that's looking at wool and alternative uses for wool, using it as a mulch or using it as different things. And it might be interesting to connect with that group, you know, if you were looking at that angle. Does that help at all?
I think that's fabulous. Like, the idea of our group is to like throw out ideas and see what sticks and see how many other people might want to band together in that collaboration and go after stuff. So, I mean, you just gave us this amazing collection of things to think about as a small ruminant working group forms, because it's not one that's formed yet, but I think we have great potential to do so. And I agree that Brady Campbell is a great resource too. And I think Cassie, he's someone that we maybe haven't reached out to invite to this group yet. And I think he might find this group really interesting.
Yep, I agree. Kathy, would you talk a little bit about the challenges of working across multiple partners? And I know we talked a little bit yesterday about some of the headaches that came with that, particularly when you're doing kind of more formal research.
Yeah, that it definitely was challenging. It definitely was, Cassie. I don't know how it is with other areas in agriculture, but I can tell you for sure that shepherds tend to be creative type people, I guess, nonconformists, something, or at least Katahdin breeders are. We can get together and come up with a plan and, okay, this is what we're going to do, A, B, and C, right? And you get back with them next week and, oh, you know what? I decided that B doesn't work anymore because, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do D instead. No, this is a grant. We've agreed to do these steps. But you know, the kids wanted to go play ball that day, so I didn't get my data collected. Okay, but collect it the next day. Trying to keep that many people going in the same direction. And then I found out it wasn't just Katahdin producers, because now that I'm thinking of it, when we hit the wool group is when I decided, okay, I'm out of this grant stuff, because I is keeping 2 years consecutively. Everybody was coming up with new ideas. Well, you know what? We tried doing it that way the first year and it didn't work. So we're not going to do it again the second year. Yeah, but we don't know what, you know, how weather played into it or how this played into it. We need to repeat it a second year so that we can weed out. No. I think that it would be so just keeping everybody going in the same direction and keeping them motivated. It was a challenge. It really was. And I know I joked with Cassie yesterday when we ran through this. I said, do you see how much white hair Joan Burke has? I said, she didn't have that when I met her. And I know it's all because she had all these farmer producers on her grants. That's what did it. That's what happened to mine too, you know. But it really is a challenge keeping everybody going in the same direction.
I think we can definitely see the rewards, though.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing today. This was just so wonderful. The journey from the questions on your farm to other farms, to other regions, to other breeds. Just super cool. We have one last question from anyone?
If there's no question, I want to share a little anecdote about the beginning of this.
Uh-oh.
I'll be brief. So this is on the passion piece, right? Oh, how important the passion is. After we made the initial contact with Dr. Shula, this is at the very beginning of this process. We set up a meeting. I think Kathy and I needed to be down in Columbus for some kind of offer meeting. And she set it up with Dr. Shula to have lunch at, and our favorite place to eat was Chatelain's, the French restaurant, right? So we went there. Kathy and Dr. Shula immediately got locked into this. It seemed like a 2-hour conversation about fecal egg counts. I'm just sitting there eating my French onion soup and my baguette, you know. I mean, it's like I didn't exist. I mean, these two people. Every time I go in there and I think of that Kathy, I know right where we sat. So
that was the very first time, though, that I had ever had that one-on-one with somebody
Right.
who knew what I was talking about and
Right.
understood and knew more than I did and was actually able. It was so exciting. And I remember walking out of that restaurant and Deb looking at me going, do you realize we sat through that whole lunch and you guys never talked about a single thing but parasites and fecal egg counts?
But that shows you how much passion that Kathy had. And also she is an incredible organizer and very logical thinker. And I know the beginning stretched, but I could see that potential in her, and I'm just so proud and happy that, but the work is not to be underestimated.
Mhm.
Whether you're a scientist or a producer of, of whatever, grants, getting grants is not for the faint of heart.
No, and that's why you have to have a team. I really, really believe that. You can't keep this up by yourself. You really
Right.
need that support. You need the what Denise was saying earlier, that a working group, you need somebody to bounce ideas off of. You need somebody to help support you. You need to, give you encouragement when you get stressed. You've got to, it's got to be team. I just really believe in collaboration.
Awesome. Anything else from anyone? Great. So,
And Cassie, just
yeah.
one more thing. Again, just like I said to Jenna, if anybody has any questions, they're always free to contact me. I'm always willing to help, if I
Yep.
can.
Awesome. I did put your website in the chat. So if you haven't seen that, it's in there. But it's Misty Oaks Katahdins. So the only tricky part is spelling Katahdins.
Well, and my
But-
email, my email is just very simple. It's kathy.bielik@gmail.com.
Again, the spelling.
We can't all be Browns.
Yeah, I know. I got married because of that name. I'll take that. Kathy.Bielek, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. There we go. Now it's in the chat too. All right. So we're talking about collaborations. Please join us next week if you've got a collaborating group and you are thinking about going for a grant. We will have Beth Nelson from SARE with us. And that will be great. And we'll give you plenty of opportunities to ask your grant related questions to her. And again, if you weren't in the beginning, we will have an in-person event on September 30th at the Black Farming Conference. And very excited about that to get some people together talking in small groups again. So look forward to that and hopefully a couple more as the fall months progress. So I think that's it for this session. So thanks everyone for joining us, and I will post this recording online, hopefully by the end of the day. So, and that address, that email or website address is also in the chat. So, all right, thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Great job.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Cassie.
Thank
Yep,
you.
my pleasure.